It's an annual celebration organized by the World Federation for Mental Health and endorsed by the World Health Organization. And I have in the studio, no stranger to us, to my left, the director of the counseling department, Mrs. Michelle de la Caudre Blake. Welcome.
Again, Mr. Williams.
And I also have to my right, Miss Jamila Connor, and she is a member of the St. Kitts Mental Health Association. Welcome, Jamila.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Right. Of course, we know that we can never talk enough about mental health. In fact, there is the old saying that there can be no health without mental health. And yet, more resources need to be pumped into mental health and mental health issues so that people can be helped with their mental health. The COVID-19 pandemic, it may seem like a belabored point. It is what we have come to know. We have come to adapt to the new norm and so on. But the pandemic, more than just killing people, the virus, the COVID-19 virus, and people becoming infected with the virus and things like that, all the lockdowns, the curfews, and all of that, it has exacerbated mental health issues, especially within the region. And for persons who are already suffering with mental health issues, they have worsened. Those mental health issues have worsened. And people have, there is more substance abuse and so on. People are looking for ways to cope with what is happening. Well, our conversation this afternoon will be about all of that. Now, Mrs. Blake, World Mental Health Day was celebrated on the 10th of October. Actually, that's my brother's birthday. And could you tell us what is the overall objective of World Mental Health Day?
All right. So, Mr. Williams, you started off by giving a little bit of a context. You identify the fact that it is commemorated each year, October 10th. The WHO commemorates, and the WHO identifies a thematic area for discussion in the hopes that the rest of the world would then focus on that thematic area so that there could be education around the thematic area, there could be understanding, awareness, and all that kind of stuff. So the overall aim of World Mental Health Day is to bring focus to a mental health issue. So to raise awareness of mental health issues around the world and to mobilize efforts in support of mental health. It provides us an opportunity for stakeholders working with mental health issues to talk about their work. So we're here today, and we will be on the airwaves during this week to talk about what happens in mental health and to identify the gaps, what needs to be done so that mental health, as much as possible, could be made a reality for people who are in need. So that is generally what the aim is. Of course, we in St. Kitts do more than just a day. We celebrate a week, and we'll talk about that as we go along. But we celebrate the week closest to the 10th of October. So the 10th of October was Sunday past, and this is our week of celebration.
Okay, now what is the theme for this year?
Okay. So
and the significance of it?
Right. The theme for this year is mental health in an unequal world. So we're looking at mental health care for all. Let's make it a reality. So mental health in an unequal world. And there is some significance to that because really this is saying to us that services, interventions, resources are not equally distributed. And so it means then that if we're talking about mental health for all, we are going to have to work on that. We're going to have to identify what the gaps are, why there are gaps, where the inequalities lie, and consequently how to fix those inequalities. And so it's about, especially in this COVID era, and as you said, you know, it's a point that is just belabored, but especially in this COVID era, we need to identify the emerging mental health issues so that there could be provision of service as much as possible.
Now, you said, of course, that in St. Kitts we just don't celebrate a day, but we set aside an entire week to highlight the importance of why we should pay attention to mental health.
Correct.
And the issues surrounding mental health. What are some of the activities?
On Sunday, we will have a church service at the Pentecostal Church of God, Sadlers. On Monday, which is today, we would have had a representative, Miss Nadia Rollins, on Island T on Win FM. And currently, we are now with you on Working for You, which is today. And Thursday, we're going to have issues on freedom. We'll have a representative, as well as a representative on Saturday inside the news. We'll also be partnering with Essence of Hope in the Independence Square to offer screenings, breast screenings, depression screenings, suicidal screenings, anxiety screenings. We also decided to create a mural outside of the JNF hospital. Now we know our mural is not only for the beautification of the community and a populated area through the arts, but it also helps to bring awareness to different issues. And mental health is a very important issue, especially during COVID. So we do encourage persons to go and take a look. I'm just going to describe the mural. We chose to send out a message that says you are not alone. In a time like this, where persons are somewhat isolated and struggling in silence, we're letting them to know that you're not alone. It's a constant visual reminder. Regardless of the day and time they may be passing, it's a constant reminder to tell them they're not alone. And just outside of that statement, we have handprints from the executive members to show that it's a community effort, and we're here to support them as much as possible. On the far end, we have Your Mind Matters, and we would like to let persons know it is important to pay attention to your mind, just as any other body parts. Just like how we go to the doctor yearly for a checkup and we go to the dentist to make sure everything is fine, it's the same thing with our minds. We have to make sure that any tweaks that can be made can be done and should be done. Therefore, that we can...
Stick a point there, Jamila. What are some of the ways you speak about, because we are not just body, we are mind, we are body, and we are soul. Mm-hmm. And the psychologists will tell you that all three must be in balance and must be connected.
Correct.
And that when there is a disconnect in any one of them, something is off. They sort of go off. Now, you spoke about we're not just body, just the way that we take care of our bodies. You know, whether it is through taking vitamins and, you know, we go to the doctor when we feel sick with our bodies and so on. How can we take care of our mind? You mentioned it. What are some of the ways for taking care of our mind? Just like we will take care of our bodies, and we know we take care of our souls in the sense that, you know, the spiritual aspect and all of that. How do we take care of our minds?
Well, we look at self-care, which contributes to different areas. It has your physical, your emotional, your spiritual, your psychological aspect of things, and also your social aspect of things. So for the physical, we encourage persons to eat healthy and work out. For the spiritual, we encourage persons to meditate, pray, do yoga, social, as much as persons sometimes think that they can do it on their own. The social aspect is very important. We're able to share with each other, so we can dance, sing, and interact, because we're giving of ourselves and receiving of others. Emotional, we need to be able to identify the emotions that we are having and understand why, and therefore we are better able to cope with those issues as well. Psychological, we want to encourage persons to be okay with therapy. And that's a stigma that persons feel like you have to be going through some real terrible things in order to seek help. But sometimes you just have some thoughts that are really bombarding your mind that you're not really able to function. And we're encouraging persons to come on out and just talk about these issues. This is what's happening with me right now. I'm not sure why. How can you assist me? So these components put together helps to create a healthy mindset for individuals, that they're able to function.
A lot of the problems of the human being starts with the mind. In fact, I think I began by saying that there can be no health without mental health, because the mind is a powerful thing. And really, it is the mind that controls the body. And so therefore, that mind and body connection. And sometimes if we tell ourselves we're sick and we're sick, the body actually starts to feel sick. I think Mrs. Blake can tell you there's something called psychosomatic illnesses or things like that. You know, you go to the doctor and the doctor can't find anything wrong with your body, but you just think that you're sick. And because of that, it throws your entire system off. You start to feel very imbalanced and all of that. So that's why I asked you, what are some of the ways in which you can take care of your mind? Because if you don't take care of your mind, and your mind runs away with you, and you develop a very unhealthy mind, you develop a very unhealthy perspective on life and all of that. Mrs. Blake, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that in terms of the mind and body connection.
Well, you are correct, and I think you summarized the importance of the balance in a way that is clearly and easily understood. When you're talking about the mind, you're talking about thinking patterns, you're talking about cognitions, you're talking about perceptions, you're talking about interpretations. So these are the things that the mind is responsible for. These things then, as you correctly said, influence your emotions, which then influence behavior. So it means then, if you look at it in that way, in that sequence, it says to us that we have some ability to control where this starts, the mind. And of course, if you could control how you interpret things, how you receive things, how you perceive things, how you reflect on things, then you could control your emotions, which then control your behavior. So when we're talking about taking care of the mind, we're talking about taking care of what you put in. How do you interpret things? If something is happening to you, do you take on a mindset of the world is against me, which then leads you to being a victim, which then leads you to feeling like a victim, I should say, which then leads you to feel in a particular way, which then leads to behaviors that suggest that you have no control. How do you interpret people's behavior? How do you perceive the world around you? Do you perceive the world as something that you have no control over? Or do you perceive the world as something where there are things that happen, but that you have immense control over lots of it? And with that being said, If I think that I have control over my world and there's a sense of efficacy, I could deal with my situations, then of course that means that my mind is healthy, which then again, you go down the road to the feelings and so forth. So at the end of the day, what we're saying is, just like how you have to take care of a garden so that weeds don't come, you have to take care of what goes in. Your sense of control, your sense of efficacy, your sense of ability to control your world, your sense of determining how you will see your world, your sense of determining how you perceive things that come to you. All those things are within your control. Sometimes people need some assistance to get to that point, and that is where, sometimes mental health practitioners come in.
Mm-hmm. I think you gave a comprehensive, because I think that is where, a lot of problems start in terms of mental health issues.
Correct.
How do we take care of our mind?
Correct.
And that is why I asked that question, because yes, we take care of our bodies, but we feed our bodies, but we also feed our minds.
Correct. Correct.
It depends on what we are taking in.
Yes.
As you said, and basically what we're taking in, the many thoughts. There are many thoughts that go through my head each day.
Correct.
There are many thoughts that go through your head each day. And a lot of these thoughts are not expressed. You see somebody and you start to think all kinds of things. Things are in your mind. You have all kinds of things you're thinking about the person. Sometimes good things, sometimes bad things. You're interpreting things and having it all stored up inside and so on. And sometimes your mind creates your reality.
Let me give you an example that I use all the time. So it's not the action or the thing that then creates the feeling. It's interpretation, as I said. So let's just say, for example, I'm sitting here and somebody passed, and, I always give this example. Somebody passed and they walk over my toes and they continue going. And I said to myself, well, they saw my toes there, my feet there. They intentionally did it. They did it because they don't like me. They did it because they intended to belittle me. So what is the resulting emotion that comes with that? I'm probably upset, mad, hurt, those strong emotions. I could take the same action. Somebody passed and walked over my toes and continued. And I could say, you know what? They probably didn't see my foot there. My foot was out. They probably were walking and thinking about something else and didn't even realize my foot was there. The resulting feeling is one you would recognize of calm and just letting it go. So that is a prime example of the power of putting something in the mind, which then changes the course of how you respond to it. And that's where you have your power.
Yes, and if we feed the mind always with things that are negative, we then our behavior starts to become very negative. We feed our minds with hate and all of that sort of a thing. The things that we read, the things that we look at, and all of that sort of a thing. And then putting all of that into our mind, we start to have a lot of fears. And I see it, we are going to get to the COVID-19 pandemic, but I see it a lot, especially with these people that are sending around a lot of fake news, creating it about the vaccines, and they're basically playing on your mind.
Yes.
And they play on your mind and they get you to become so fearful that your behavior adjusts to that sort of a fear.
Correct.
And we have to, and all the things like crimes and what people do, the plotting, and the kind of evil things that are carried out, and all of that sort of a thing, somehow is conceptualized somewhere.
Correct.
And it is conceptualized in the mind.
Exactly. Exactly.
And even before I speak or I say something to you, Mrs. Blake, there is some concept already that I have. And then I have to put it into language. It starts in the mind, I put it into language, and I put it into some sort of a code, and then I'm able to transmit it to you via something.
Correct. Even the language you put it in then determines how it affects you, because you could put it in language that suggests it's catastrophic, or it's all or nothing, or something is always happening to me. And even that then influences. So,
Yeah.
and again, we have control over how we frame things.
And that French philosopher, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he was a great philosopher, René Descartes.
Yes.
And René Descartes said, I think, therefore I am.
Right.
Cogito
Yes.
ergo sum.
Correct. 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 Yes.
You know, so our thinking,
I think yes.
you know, creates the reality.
Correct.
You
You're
see?
correct. You're
Right.
correct.
Okay, but we are in this COVID era, and there have always been mental health issues, but the pandemic has heightened, increased the mental health issues, and, you know, we hear a lot about the people going to the hospitals, we hear about the treating of the body, and all of that sort of a thing. But what about access to mental health care? Access to mental health care in a COVID environment.
So we recognize that in this COVID environment, access to mental health care has been impacted, has been adversely impacted. Because, you know, I'm not just talking about here in the Federation, I'm going to talk worldwide because this is a global issue. Access to mental, and we're talking about, you know, mental health in an unequal world. So access to mental health care has been impacted. First and foremost, you have many programs, many interventions, many outlets for people with mental health needs having to shut their doors in the COVID era, having to change how they operate, having to adjust how they operate. And of course, the mental health resources are already so limited. And so if you have to adjust and downsize in terms of provision of services, you're talking about the people who need it most are going to be affected. And usually, the people who are most affected and most vulnerable are not the people who are going to necessarily go out and push and advocate for finding another resource. They're the ones who perhaps will silently slip back into the shadows because it took all of their everything in the first place to access resources. So you've had a lot of adjustments done. You've had situations, I know here in St. Kitts, for example, when we were first faced with the lockdown conditions, before we knew what we were dealing with. I mean, we were all learning at the time. We all just basically had to shut our doors and then had to think on our feet of how we re-engage people who need care and who need counseling services. And of course, that re-engagement was markedly different from what was there before. So whereas, for example, you'd have the benefit of face-to-face contact, that was lost. You'd have to find different platforms, and some of those platforms didn't work for some people. Some people didn't necessarily have access to some platforms. Services, for example, like the Mental Health Day Treatment Center, where people go there on a regular and daily basis for therapy and for therapeutic work, had to close. So you had time frames where people were not able to get the care. And as I said, you're talking about interrupting a cycle, and that, of course, causes problems. So you've had that. During the World Health Assembly in May 2021, governments from around the world recognized that there needed to be to scale up quality mental health services on all levels because of this very fact, because of the fact that during COVID, so many aspects of care were interrupted. So there was a global acknowledgement and recognition that it needed to happen. So who are the people that are affected? And I think, it's obvious that there are certain groups of people that are more affected than others. You have frontline workers. They're the ones who are in the thick and thin of everything, especially when we were just starting out with our experiences of COVID without an understanding of COVID. Somebody had to be out front, and somebody had to be the ones identified to take care of people who might be sick. And remember when this first started, we were getting all this information bombarding us So what we knew that it was a killer, and we had this thing that was just circling the world without any sort of restraint, and we're saying people like doctors and nurses had to be out front. Now I would imagine if I'm a nurse in that situation, it could be scary.
Fear.
Right, it could be scary. So you have mental health, you have frontline workers, you have students. We are seeing recently what has been happening with schools. There's some countries where they've made a decision not to return to school because of the COVID in the communities. We've been lucky that we've been able to return to school, and then of course we all know we've had to stop and start and stop and so forth because of. And so we're talking about students who need structure, who need routine, who need the community of school for their development, and we're talking about that being impacted. So they, of course, were affected by it. You're talking about people living with pre-existing conditions. Again, we talk about the fact that there was so much information about who is safe and who is not safe. The people with pre-existing conditions, should you isolate yourself? Should you, what do you do? You have an added layer of thing to worry about. So you have these sorts of situations. People with mental, neurological, substance use disorders, all of these people were significantly impacted by the COVID pandemic. And so, of course, the impact would be on their mental health. And I don't know if Jamila wanted to add anything to that, but that was a mouthful, so I wanted to see if there's something else that's there.
Well, additional group would be persons who living alone, who will seem to isolate themselves even more, and they become a higher risk for suicidal thoughts. So it was important to be able to check in with that individual because they're by themselves, so you have to seek support system for that individual as well.
The COVID has brought out this whole thing about the virtual, and somehow we have connected more through virtual means, whether it be by Zoom meetings because of the restrictions on travel, and students learning in a virtual environment. Of course, that has its challenges. The virtual world has its challenges. Not everyone has equal access to the technology and all of that, because we still have the digital divide.
Correct.
And that becomes a problem. Not everyone may have a computer. Not everyone may have internet. And students, you spoke about the students and the disrupted learning. Their learning has been, disrupted so many times, and also for the teachers as well, because they have a curriculum to deliver, and as there's a syllabus, and oftentimes it's also disrupted.
Correct.
So it is a, to term it really, the classroom has become a disrupted learning environment, and the impact that is probably having on the students, but not only the students and the teachers and so on. And basically, I think that they have to take that, what is happening, the disrupted learning, the disrupted teaching, and make it such that our students, our young people, can use that to learn about life.
Okay.
And the ups and downs about life and all that they are going through, helping them to deal with their emotions and all of that. It can also be, because every crisis is a moment of opportunity.
Right.
To really to learn something new and to come out of something better and stronger.
Right.
But of course, sometimes we need the support systems.
Correct.
Sometimes if those systems are not there, then we are not able to cope. And
Correct.
that is where the mental health issues
Right.
may increase.
And just keeping, just keeping the theme, our focus, mental health in an unequal world. So even if, mental health care for all, let's make it a reality. Even if you think of this population that you just mentioned, the students, we think about countries that have more resources, that have an approach to dealing with. So you have an abundance of counselors, and you have social workers, and you have people who would visit the families for people who may not be in school, and you have resources that then mean that there is some leveling of the provision of service. And the goal of WHO for this year is to focus on the fact that everybody doesn't have equal access, because access to mental health care is not just access to clinicians, to clinical counselors. Access to mental health care is about access to information, access to tangible resources, access to referral sources. So it means then that we're talking about, and again, just keeping in line with what we're talking about here, we're talking about how do we, with the students, bridge those inequalities. I think one of the first things that needs to happen to make a bridge happen is that there must be an awareness that the students are impacted by this, because I still think that there is a sense that, they get to stay home, they already like technology anyway, so they should be okay. Why are they having issues? Without recognizing, for example, the vital role that school plays in terms of social development, emotional development, cognitive development, well, of course, intellectual development. So in terms of access for all, one of the things that needs to happen to bridge people to access is there must be an awareness that there is an impact. And if there is an awareness that there's an impact, then there could be proactive measures taken so that access, appropriate access could be achieved.
Now, a lot of what you just mentioned, Mrs. Blake, in terms of the children, the students, and how they're impacted by all these other issues that they would have to deal with, and how that is affecting their learning. I think that when this pandemic is over, there would be a lot of catching up in terms of learning, because sometimes you're out of the classroom for so long, and it's taking a toll really on students.
Well, both WHO and UNICEF, which is the United Nations Fund for Children, both of them have sounded the alarm about what this pandemic is doing for young people. WHO, from the perspective of the gaps that it is going to create in terms of emotional development, psychological development, and so on. I just mentioned the importance of school in that development. And UNICEF has sounded the alarm in saying that, pretty much the same thing, but saying that this pandemic is going on for almost 2 years now, has put some of the world's children back years in terms of their learning, in terms of their potential, and of course that has implications for their potential for earning, and it has implications for economic growth and all kinds of things as you go down. So the point that I'm making is we're here talking about an unequal world, certainly as it relates to mental health, but there are other agencies that are sounding the alarm that inequality is showing itself, or will show itself in so many other areas other than just mental health.
Yes, and students at universities and graduates not being able to find work because of the pandemic, the unemployment that has been created, and all of that, all of these things are really affecting people. And Jamila, you mentioned a very good point in terms of people living alone. Because it's one thing to live alone, but what the pandemic has done with all these isolation issues and lockdowns and so on, if you live alone, that loneliness is increased, that sense of isolation is increased, because whereby you could have called somebody over to come and visit, that has been restricted.
Indeed.
Right. So how can we improve access? Because access is important. And if access is not improved, then the mental health issues are going to be exacerbated even more because people don't have access. So what has changed relating to mental health and improving access?
Okay. Well, one of the things that has changed is the more we do things like this, Mr. Williams, the more we sit with various groups and organizations and entities, and we have discussions about mental health issues, the more people realize that it's not limited to one or two presentations of severe mental illness. So the more we sit with people, the more we realize that mental health issues relate to so many things, substance use, inability to control emotions, anger, all kinds of things, right? So it means then that the more we are aware of what the conversations should be, the more understanding we have about the length and breadth of mental health issues. And it means then that we start to streamline mental health issues into everything. We streamline mental health issues into everything. So what has changed in mental health so that we could improve access? We are streamlining. We are connecting more things to mental health issues, not mental illness, to mental health issues. And so it means that the conversation is broadening. And as the conversation is broadening, it means that people have more of an awareness of, oh, I need this. I need to sort myself out here. And the more the conversation broadens, the more people have an understanding of what services are available for them. Because I go back to saying, it's not just counseling, clinical counseling. There's so many other avenues and other areas of provision of psychosocial support that people could get to deal with different things. So some of the things that are changing, we're having more understanding of mental health issues. We're having more awareness and sensitivity. So we're not having language of it's them against us, it's you, and you have that and I don't have that. So we're changing that. The language surrounding mental health is changing. So I think you're not hearing so much about people using derogatory terms, and I don't have to repeat them for us to know some of the derogatory terms that people have used over the years.
Towards people with mental health issues.
Correct. Those things are changing. So the language is becoming more inclusive, more all of us, more this is something we all need to deal with. So those are some of the things. Yes.
How can we, Jamila, the coping mechanisms, and especially among our young people, who sometimes, because they may keep things bottled up inside, and they don't have that very good relationship, perhaps in the homes, and so on, that they may turn to substance abuse. So you may see an increase in the use of marijuana among our young people. But what is underlying that increase? What is under there? It could be very well that it's a way that some people cope. And what is being done, basically, for our young people to help them really with mental health matters? Because of course, what we see oftentimes is our young people are having mental health problems, ending up at the hospital, in the psyche ward. Sometimes you just see a person and they're gone, whatever the drugs. Sometimes people say it's Spranger and all that sort of a thing. But oftentimes there are a lot of mental health issues among young people. it is not just among older people, but among our younger people, and what is being done to help our young people to cope, especially at this time?
Well, first thing, we have to encourage the young people that they are persons that they can confide in and trust. And I think that is one of the issues why young people don't speak up, because they don't feel like when I say something to you, it's going to be kept in confidentiality. It's going to be spread onto the streets. And the second thing is the fear of how the person may look at me when they hear the stuff that I'm thinking or going through. So the fear of being rejected or looking differently is some factors why persons may withdraw instead of speaking up. And that is something that we have to try to remedy to get persons to speak up. And also we have to point out to young people that change is inevitable. If it's one thing that is constant, it's change. And therefore we must provide them with the necessary tools in order to cope. So I know it's in the school sector in terms of guidance counselors. They provide students with tools to cope with change, and coping depending on the emotions they're going through. So if there's fear or anger, they know that they can probably scream into a pillow. They can write down the emotions. They can calm down and write down the emotions and be able to express them in a more polite and effective manner. They're able now to do a little self-care. It's important for you to be able to control it and control it. So making up your bed, doing simple things that, you know, this is within my control, tends to give you more of a confidence, like I'm able to face the world. Another thing is accessing your higher self. For example, persons who may be going through anxiety and stuff, being able to take care of a pet or animal, that takes the focus off of you for a moment and put it on something else where now you feel like, oh, I'm really impacting someone else, you know. So providing students with the necessary tools or toolkits, so they picked out whichever tool, depending on the emotions or the issues they're facing, will empower them to be able to handle what's happening.
So that is some of the ways in which they can cope with the stressors that are in the environment. Of course, you know, Mrs. Blake, you have those stressors that are in the environment. They come from outside, but then the stressors don't always come from outside. Sometimes the stressors are within. And sometimes there's that collision between the internal stressors and the external ones.
Right. And I think we talked a little bit about that when we talked about the connection between what happens in the mind, which then impacts the emotion, which then impacts behavior. Because implied in that, you know, that connection there is that there is some stress. Remember, stress is something that is subjective, all right? So stress is not a thing or an event. It is your subjective experience of it. So it means then that we go back to what we talked about, being able to help an individual identify the things that are contributing, so it could even internally, those are stressors. And then, of course, then have a way to work on a way of managing it. But again, it comes back to having access to the facilities that provide that kind of support. Because again, we go back to this whole unequal access. People who may be struggling with internal stressors have to know that, first of all, it is something that I should attend to. The second thing then becomes, where do I go? Who do I go to? Do I go to, you know, who is there? And so, again, just in terms of the provision of service and making sure there's access for all, these conversations help people to, first of all, recognize things within themselves, recognize that these are not necessarily things that they have to live with, and that there are a myriad of ways that they could be dealt with.
Now let's talk advocacy and how we can help to advocate for and bring awareness to mental health. How can we do that? How can we advocate and bring awareness to mental health? How can we help?
Okay. All right. Do you want me to?
Uh,
Yeah. Okay.
that
You
will
go
fall,
ahead.
that
Okay.
will fall under the roles of the St. Kitts Mental Health, and that is in turn in providing workshops within different organizations, institutions as well, to bring awareness to different topics and issues and how they can properly deal with that. We can also create support groups, conduct fundraisers for persons who are in need, and even to create mentorship programs and provide persons with resources, because sometimes persons don't know what is out there. And once they know what is out there and how to access it, they'll be more empowered to go and get the help that is necessary.
I want to add to that too, that, you know, adults work 8, 9, 10 hours a day. So it means 8, 9, 10 hours a day, they are in some other space. And 9 times out of 10 in that some other space, mental health issues are going to reveal themselves if they're there. And so, of course, when that happens, we're talking about an impact on the work productivity, you're talking about all kinds of things. So I say that to say, when we're talking about advocating for mental health issues, one of the biggest groups that could advocate are the workplaces, the employers. And the advocacy doesn't have to come in terms of any big thing. Advocacy could be in terms of the environment that is created. Advocacy could come in terms of just having little visuals or posters on walls that speak to wanting to make sure you take care of yourself. That could be advocacy. Advocacy, as Jamila indicated, could come in terms of workshops, and we find that a lot of workplaces are doing that. Advocacy could come in the form of EAPs, employee assistance programs, where companies say, look, we recognize that in order for a person to function, they have to be okay. And so we provide avenues for them to have access. We're talking about access. Remember, again, I keep going back to that being the focus of our discussion. So all of these things are ways that could provide access and balance out that inequality. But advocacy doesn't only come from companies. Advocacy comes from your own knowledge of the power you have in being able to take care of yourself. So intentionally practicing self-care. That is you making sure that you're doing something for yourself to have some level of access to care, right? And the access is from you. Promoting self-care for children. So again, just sort of moving away from this notion that children ought not to have problems or don't have problems or don't have concerns. Actively promoting and being advocates for children, especially smaller ones that are unable to use expressive language in a way that clearly indicates what's going on with them. We know for sure that I go back to the small children. Small children need structure, routine, day in, day out, they know what's happening. And for them, that's the importance of school. So when daycare has to close and when school has to close and they're little, it affects them. They don't have the ability to say that it affects them, but it affects them. So advocacy means that the more we understand that, then the more we provide parents with assistance in terms of saying, look, your children are not in school, your little ones are not in school, but they will be affected this way. So make sure when you're home, you do this, that provides a sense of equality. That's just one example. So, I'm trying to link everything back to that point because it's important for us to keep the focus here on access in an unequal world. Yes.
It's interesting that you mentioned the companies, organizations, because sometimes companies, especially in a capitalist world, are driven by profit. They're profit-driven, they're productivity-driven, and that is what matters to them. And Sometimes you don't hear in terms of having a retreat for the staff to get away and to reflect.
Yes.
And things like that, which are important to people's mental health.
Right.
Sometimes the resources are not always provided for those kinds of things. The resources going to other things. You know, for example, maybe in getting equipment so you can work more efficient and better and things like that, but not into things that really will nurture the mind
Yes, okay.
and nurture the spirit and things like that, which at the end of the day are more important than having a machine in terms of getting more done, in
Right.
terms of productivity.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think you hit the nail on the head, because basically what you're saying is there is no productivity and achievement if a person is not
Well.
having a balance in his or her life. But my
But
experience,
it's also, Mrs. Blake, it's also, you know, it cannot be one-sided as well. So on one hand, we can speak about the company and what the company is doing, but on the other hand, what are you doing?
correct, personal responsibility.
Yes.
But I have found, though, in all of that, I have found that companies are, we talked about sensitivity and awareness. I think that companies are starting to be aware of the fact that these things need to happen. And, you know, there certainly are companies that on a regular basis engage their employees in some sort of avenue to be able to improve just their knowledge and access to mental health services. So we're getting there, we're getting there, little bit by little bit.
Okay, now why is, we speak about World Mental Health Day, and the day has been set aside just for that. Why is World Mental Health important? World Mental Health, why is it important?
Okay, I'll go ahead. Now, in order for us to be able to do what we say we need to do, which is bridge the gap between what is needed versus what is actually there, so that there could be access, we need to be able to identify emerging trends. So it's important because World Mental Health is important because it could help us to identify trends, emerging trends in mental health issues. Now, certainly, for example, with COVID, we keep going back to that, there is a recognition that there is an emerging trend of anxiety levels, high anxiety levels among people who would not have previously been identified as at risk for anxiety or depression. So that is an emerging trend. And with that information, we have to do something to be able to bridge gaps. So it's important for us to identify emerging trends. It is important because it could help us to identify resources to deal with the issues. So if you have, for example, a situation where we're recognizing that there is increased impact, mental health impact on children, so that's an emerging trend. It means then that in planning, we have to say, let us plan for making sure that we have people trained in child and adolescent psychiatry, child and adolescent mental health, because there's no use identifying a trend and then not being able to fill the gap, because then it goes back to unequal access, people in different parts of the world having access as people, and people here not having. So it helps us to identify the resources that we need to deal with issues. It allows for proper access to treatment as awareness grows. So as awareness grows, people are willing to say, you know what, I don't mind seeing if I could call up a counselor. I don't mind seeing if I could call up the day treatment center and go there. I don't mind calling up the JNF psychological services and go there. So as we have awareness, then people have proper access to treatment. And then, of course, that would reduce the gap. And then it allows us to develop advocacy for special groups. And special groups are not groups that typically, come out of the woodwork and present themselves and say, here we are, a special group. They usually are not so clearly identified. We have to identify them. We have to say, well, look, these people, this group, this population we're noticing that they're experiencing this, or we're seeing more challenges from them in this particular way. So, World Mental Health is important because it allows us to see who those special groups are, what their needs are, and then advocate for.
Good. I'm happy that you mentioned that because, Mrs. Blake, a lot of mental health illnesses go undetected. And because they are undetected, they're untreated. I think sometimes when people come to the counselor or when they come to the psychologist or the psychiatrist is when something that was detected, if it could have been detected, crisis, if it could have been detected earlier, then there could have been treatment, earlier treatment.
Correct.
And the World Health Organization has said that half of all mental illness begins by the age of 14 years.
Youth.
Begins in youth.
Yes.
So the question is, why does it go undetected and untreated? Is it that we are not looking out? Because 14 years to me tells me that a child is at that stage of development, a very turbulent years,
right,
when they are going through a lot of changes to their bodies and to their thinking, and this
Correct.
trying to identity crisis.
Correct.
And all of that sort of a thing, as Erik Erikson will speak about, that crisis of youth.
Correct, yes.
And how more of our attention and resources should really be placed there when children are going through that period, so that we can have more balanced
Right.
young people.
I am going to differ a bit in terms of that. I don't necessarily think that it's that they go undetected. I think we miss the signs. And we miss the signs because of perhaps a couple of reasons. So undetected is different to, in my view, not paying attention to. Let me put it that way, not paying attention to. Because sometimes, many times, in retrospect, so you talk about crisis being a thing that sometimes brings a person into service. In retrospect, when you start to go back, you will hear but yes, I noticed that she used to close herself off, but I thought it was just her being. Or I noticed that she couldn't get along with anybody at work, but I thought it was just that. Or I noticed that, but I thought it was just that. So it's not that it's undetected, I think, because symptoms don't just go from being undetected to being detected. I mean, generally speaking.
Or issues with anger. You notice
yes,
the person is very angry.
Yes. So what is happening is we don't connect what we're seeing to mental health issues. Again, because we have such a narrow perception of what mental health issues look like, what they look like. So as we continue to have the conversations, as we continue to sensitize, as we continue to discuss, as we continue to educate, then you have people being able to say, look, I work with John, and I noticed that today John didn't come to work, and I noticed that tomorrow he didn't come to work either, and that's not like John. I wonder if something is going on with John. That's a whole different ballgame. So the more people are aware of those things, the more then they're able to make those connections. The more then they're able to help to provide access. Because if I'm a co-worker with John and I notice that and I pay attention to it and I say something about it and I say something to my supervisor who may be then able to say, well, let me sit and talk with what you're doing early is providing connections. You're providing access to psychosocial support in some way so that you don't leave it to a point where there is just this gap. And then you get a person to a point where they need higher level services and the resources are not as,
Yes.
as readily available. So I'm saying in a nutshell, I don't think that that there is not a, what did you say? You talk
Undetected.
about undetected. I don't think that it's undetected. I think we have to become more aware of so that we could pinpoint and pay attention. And if you pinpoint and pay attention, you could start early. That's what I think.
Right. Yes, Jamila.
And just to add to that, I think once we build that awareness and empower the community, that they will take a more active role in terms of the adolescents, in terms of the 14-year-old, where they can now see that, yes, it's not my child, but I'm going to take an interest and mentor that individual, and also
Yes.
provide them with opportunities that they may not be able to have if there was not there to help them. So therefore, they're more able to adapt and experience different things that would help them to navigate through this life, through school, and be able to now attain the goals that they set out for themselves.
Right. Now, Jamila, good point. And of course, you said it's mental health in an unequal world. And oftentimes, people who have mental health illnesses do not experience equality. And there are a lot of concerns, especially for people living with mental health issues. We call them crazy. We laugh after them, and things like that, without even looking at our own craziness. That's another story. So, but what are some of the concerns of people living with mental health issues?
Well, definitely the stigma is one. Discriminating against them, making them feel less than. Lack of support that they think are out there. Limited access and employment and housing for persons with challenges. So those are most of the concerns that they will have.
But people can live with mental health illnesses, and that is something that we should be able to understand, whether it is that the person is suffering with schizophrenia or paranoia. There's medication and people can live a healthy life with mental illness and be normal and work and all of that.
Correct.
Is it that we have an improper understanding of mental health illness? It stems from there, where we think that somebody who has a mental illness, that they cannot function normally. Do you think that's a big part of the problem?
That's a part of it, and so that's a part of the ongoing work. That's why we're on radio. That's why we're in groups. That's why we're doing presentations. That's why we're doing, because
Yes.
it means then that there is a move towards shifting that concept of what mental illness is. A few years ago, the theme for World Mental Health Day was integrity in mental health. Integrity in mental health. And basically that it spoke to what you were just speaking about. The fact that people have a right to earn a living, to live healthily, to live properly, to not suffer from discrimination, to not be stigmatized. Everybody has a right to live with integrity, including people with mental illnesses. And so bringing it back to this year's theme now, again, the more there is awareness building, the more there's education, psychoeducation, breaking down stigma and all that kind of stuff, the more people are able to live their full lives. Because you're correct. People have been living full and productive life, have families, have homes, have jobs with mental illness. So their own awareness of their mental illness and their own compliance in their care, their own access to care, and the care that then allows them to live that life. So you see how it loops around. So at the end of the day, a person gets to live with dignity and integrity. But yes, these are some of the things that people have to deal with on a regular basis. The stigma, the discrimination, yes.
Yes, the important point that you mentioned, Jamila, in terms of the lack of support, I think that plays a big role, that people with mental health illness should be supported. For example, who checks upon me? Who makes sure that I am taking my medication? Who makes sure that, look, asks me, what type of mood are you in? Those things are extremely important. And at the heart of it, the way that we treat people with mental illness, people who are vulnerable in our society, is a litmus test, really, of what kind of society we really are.
Right. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
It is really, that is the test, how we treat those among us who are most vulnerable, and so on.
Yes.
Okay, we have to go to the phone lines. Should have opened it before, but the conversation is quite interesting. The numbers to call are 466-2666. That is 466-2666. The cell numbers are 662-8674, 662-8674, 767-4765, 767-4765, and the overseas number is 1-239-645-4500. It is 1-239-645-4500. We welcome your calls. Right, so while we are talking about the persons with mental illness and those who have to care for them, what about who counsels the counselor? Who counsels the counselor? Because a lot of times we think that, look, we're working and we're helping people, but at the very same time, we have to contend with our own mental health issues, and sometimes, how do you not take on the issues that are coming to you and the problems that are coming to you without allowing that to weigh you down and so on? So who counsels the counselor? Because at the end of the day, I am very conscious that we are all wounded healers.
Okay. All right. So who counsels the counselor? Jamila, who counsels the counselor? One of the things I want to say on that is that, and you alluded to it, we are all responsible for our self-care. We have a responsibility to ourselves for our self-care. Now, ideally, in an ideal situation, any mental health practitioner has the ability to sit and bounce things off of with somebody absolutely neutral, somebody just impartial, to just sort of just reset, right, in an ideal world. We have a small world, so I come back to that unequal. We have a small world in our federation where the practitioners are few, and so just in terms of that setup that I just described, it may not necessarily be readily available. However, we do have the ability to sit with each other and express, right? And sometimes just doing that is helpful because there's feedback, there's validation, there's the ability to sort of help you to go again. There's that. So we have to do that amongst each other. But we also have a responsibility to take care of ourselves. And the more we know, the more you are able to use your knowledge, because we are asking people to take knowledge and to translate that into behavior. So we should ask it for ourselves. So the more, yes.
We have a caller.
Okay.
Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Lesroy.
Good afternoon.
And the export ladies there on mental problem.
Good afternoon.
Lesroy.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, we're hearing you.
Let's
We are hearing you.
Okay, I'm not hearing you. Anyway, my question to the exports there. Now, can someone switch from at least 10% mental mentally disturbed, to 100% Paul crazy overnight? I'll listen up here for the answer.
So that person is wanting to find out about the speed in which something could happen, where it moves from apparently that everything is okay, to things being in crisis mode. And the answer is yes. Yes, it could happen. And it could happen because I always tell people, all of us are on a continuum, moving along that continuum on a regular basis between absolute mental health and mental illness. So we are always moving. And all of us could be one loss of a job, one illness, one loss of a family member, one something away from it carrying us over to another part of the continuum. So that was a very good question he asked, because it goes back to something that I said earlier, where I indicated that we should not think of mental health issues as an us versus a them. It should be that all of us are aware of the fact that with life issues, we never know at one stage or the other what combination of things, for me, would be the thing that just makes it that I can't deal with it.
The trigger.
The trigger. So I could be fine today, and everything is going fine, but there are things that are there that I'm dealing with, but they're fine. And then I get to the point where just that one last thing carries me to another part of the continuum. So again, it goes back to something I said, where I said earlier that mental health, taking care of our mental health is something that we are responsible for on a regular basis, on an ongoing basis, on an intentional basis, because we never know.
I often hear that one of the best remedies for our mental health is really to find somebody with whom you can trust and talk it out. Sometimes you don't even want advice, but the very fact that you have a listening ear, that somebody is there to hear what you have to say, to unburden yourself of really what you're carrying, because some of us are walking around with some very heavy load.
And what you
and
are
it's weighing
describing,
us down, and sometimes you can really see it, that the person is walking around with a very heavy load. And sometimes, especially, I had a friend, and the friend went off when I was growing up, and we were very good friends and so on. And only to hear that, oh, she man done with her. Things like that, you know, intimate relationships, people losing a boyfriend, or what is you get the done. They say you get the done, and some people can't deal with the done. You know that sort of a thing? But at the very same time, you mentioned this about the self-care. Who can you talk to? Do you value people more than you value yourself? Do you put all your trust in people? My grandmother used to say, leave room for disappointment.
Yes. But you know, I wanted to say something on that, because I think we started talking about self-care and mental health workers. But I wanted to say something on the talking to a neighbor and so forth, because again, you hit on a point. It doesn't have to be a counselor that provides that resource for support. Everybody doesn't have to come to counseling. It could be that, and people have responsibilities for developing relationships that are healthy. So I have relationships that are developed, and I know that I'm carrying some burdens, and I could sit with my neighbor and talk to my neighbor, and my neighbor provides me with a listening ear. Psychosocial support. I could go to my pastor, and he talks through some things with me. Psychosocial support. So it doesn't have to be counseling support. We're talking about psychosocial support.
Yes, and you've mentioned a very good point. And then how do you differentiate that from, or how do you know when you need clinical counseling? Because I may feel down. There are times when I feel down. I feel down, but I'm not really depressed. I just have a down feeling. It lasts for whatever. And then, tomorrow I'm fine. I'm back to normal.
Well,
But then how do you determine that between somebody really having clinical depression and somebody just feeling down? Because not every time I'm down, I really should use the word that I'm depressed, because
Correct.
depressed is a clinical term.
well, let me put it this way, just in terms of just simplifying it as much as I could. You're looking for intensity, you're looking for length of time, and you're looking for impact on your normal life. That then determines, because you're right, all of us have situations that make us a bit down. That's normal. You don't run to somebody because you're a bit down. That is a normal emotion in life. And Jamila talked earlier about emotional self-care, where you have to manage emotions. We're not just telling people your goal in life is to be happy. Your goal in life is to be able to manage life's normal emotions. So something has happened and you're able to pinpoint, I am down because this has happened. It's situational, specific. Then you have to ride with the normal waves that come with it. So if you're looking at clinical intervention, you're looking at a situation where it's going on for a long time. So I am down for weeks or months. You're looking at intensity. It is so intense that I can function. I can get out of bed, I can go to work, I can function. And you're looking at impact on life. I can't do my motherly duties. I can't operate as an employee. The impact on my normal life. So those are the things, just in terms of, saying it simply.
Or having feelings
Those are
of
the things.
self-harm.
Yes. So
Harming
that
yourself.
would go on the intensity, right? So length of time, intensity, and impact on normal life. That is the difference.
Or having to turn to coping mechanisms such as substance abuse.
Correct.
Now, looking forward, because we have to look forward, Jamila, is there really hope for optimism with mental health? Are you seeing a change? Are you seeing a reduction in the stigma and discrimination? Are you seeing more resources being pumped into mental health? Or, put it another way, do you have enough resources?
I think anybody in mental health would say we never have enough resources. But Jamila, I'll let you answer. We never have enough resources. We'll always say that. We never have enough resources.
Well, the way forward, as you can see, we're building awareness, and that's one of the ways to go forward. Sensitizing persons. As we spoke about, we're going to have screenings. On Saturday in the square, that's a very general area that person just walking by can stop and get screened. They don't actually have to think about going out to health facility, because that takes a lot of thought, and they might even start to doubt themselves. But seeing that we're coming towards them in their own space, that helps as well. So I can say that we are moving forward by building awareness, sensitizing persons, letting them know to emphasize empathy, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. How important is that for their mental health?
I think also in terms of the way forward as a federation, we have to determine a pathway. So the way forward includes something I mentioned earlier, being able to identify emerging trends to then set in place as a federation priority areas for training. That's a way forward, so that you could manage access, so that there could be equality for all. Because if we're saying that there are emerging trends as it relates to youth and children, and we don't have people who are trained with youth and children, adolescent and child psychiatry, then we are limiting access. Substance use disorders, that is on the rise, especially in youth and in adolescents. So training again to make sure that there are enough practitioners who have the resources to deal with substance use disorders. That's the way forward. We have to prepare for. Training to make sure that, because we're talking about mental health access, and I just mentioned psychosocial support. So again, part of our responsibility is to make sure that people recognize mental health and psychosocial support go together. So the training that is needed for mental health clinical intervention is different to what is needed for psychosocial support. We could train anybody to allow them to provide psychosocial support to their neighbor, to the young people in the community, to groups within the community. So that is something where training then allows for access, equal access, because everybody is not going to need specialized services. Sometimes people just need psychosocial support. There are training modalities, simple, straightforward, that we could use across the board. So in terms of looking forward, these are some of the things that we have to look to. There's a call, apparently, Mr. Williams.
Yes. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. What a long time. Four windows. Anyway, first thing I want to say. Now, somebody mentioned something about working in maybe like factories and so, and the owners, the employers only concerned mostly about profit. But I believe that, let's say, look at St. Kitts. A lot of noise in the phone by. They have some labor laws where Department of Labor is supposed to go and inspect and at a regular time to see what's going on there, to see the health of the people. And I want to say that, I want to ask also that, if you think when children were living with both parents, and they have a good interaction with the parents, mother and father that is, that if they stand a lesser chance of becoming mentally ill. And let me leave it there, because a lot of noise in the phone. I can't go along with that. I have more to say, but I can't continue. A lot of noise. Have a good day. I have more to say, but I can't.
Okay. Thank you very much for your call. Did you understand what he said? Okay.
While we don't have any direct influence on labor laws, what we have been saying is happening, and we continue to encourage it to happen, is that there is a streamlining of mental health issues into all issues. So what we're finding is happening is that if we're talking about gender, we include mental health. If we're talking about youth, we include mental health. If you're talking about labor, you should include mental health. And so perhaps as we continue to advocate for and go forward, that could be something where the conversations could be connected, so that there is that, it reflects properly what needs to happen. And then he asked another question about a child in a home where there's a healthy home where there are two parents, and the likelihood of them becoming mentally ill. While there is no guarantee for a person there's no guarantee against mental illness or having mental health issues, we as practitioners always look for pro-social conditions, conditions that support, conditions that nurture. And the more pro-social conditions you have where a child is socialized in, the more likely they are to be able to develop the fortitudes, the strengths, the insights, the abilities, the resilience. That's the word I want to use rather than strength. The resilience to be able to withstand some of the things that will come at them in life. So he described a situation where the family was healthy, intact. So the implication is that there is enough of a support system and a nurturing to be able to provide some of the resilient things that a child may need to be able to then address life issues. So they have a better chance in a situation he described.
Okay. Now, we spoke before about the at-risk groups and what can we look forward to. And there's still a lot of work that needs to be done with at-risk groups. They need proper mental care. We can talk about the youth and the adolescents, the elderly, and especially issues of loneliness around that time and feelings of inadequacy and feeling that, look, I wasted my life. And they may feel sometimes, you know, oh, I contributed a lot and I feel good about my life. Proper mental health care for the LGBT community. People living with substance use disorders, single mothers, severe mental illness, and so on. We still have a lot of work to do. Let us hear a bit about the LGBT community.
I am not going to single him out other
Yeah,
than to say, right, that any group that has been marginalized for whatever reason, whatever their situation is, any group that has been marginalized, they're starting off with more risk factors because there's more driving them into secrecy, into isolation, and that goes for single mothers, people living in substance use disorders. You're driving them into secrecy and isolation. You are taking away access because of that secrecy and isolation. That just automatically means that there is less access.
Do you think single mothers in today's society have been marginalized?
To some degree.
To some degree they have been, but it has become so much the norm. And it really should not be the norm.
Well,
it really should not be.
Right.
They are marginalized by the very people who should not marginalize them, and oftentimes by the father of the child. And sometimes there's still this stigma in the society about having a single mothers and single parents and that sort of a thing. But to me, that is not. Society has become more accepting of different family forms.
True. We've always had single mothers, so I look at marginalized in a little different
Okay,
light.
sure.
Because what you're talking about is obvious and clear, specific behaviors that lead to,
they don't
right.
have the support.
Marginalized could be not the support. Marginalized could be that I have to do it on my own and I just don't have the strength and ability to go figure out how to do something else. So it means that I'll do without, and it means that my children,
Sure.
Those are the things that
I
lead to-
agree.
Yes, okay. Right, yes. Yes.
Okay, what does unequal access look like? What does it look like?
Yeah, I think,
We've touched on it on
we've
many
talked so much
things.
today that I think we looked at unequal access and what it looks like. It looks like the inability to know where to go. It looks like not having a voice to be able to advocate for self. It looks like not having a person advocate for me. So we really touched on that in
Right.
our discussions today.
In terms
Jamila.
of proper mental health for the elderly, as you mentioned, that's just a part where they now feel lonely. And it's important that we provide support within the family and even to volunteer. You know that there's an old person or elderly person that lives alone. You go and spend some time with that individual. You listen to their stories. You see how you can assist in terms of going to the shop for them and purchasing what they need, or helping them around the home, like washing dishes, or just doing something to assist them and let them know that there are persons who are there for them. And proper mental health care for youth and adolescents, as I mentioned before, mentorship and support groups, especially in that time where they're trying to figure out what's really happening. So those are little things I want to really add in terms of the at-risk groups.
Okay, now the importance of professionalizing the profession so that adequate and relevant care is given, what is the role of and training of the psychiatrist, the psychologist, the mental health counselor, the school guidance counselor, the social worker, other helping professions?
Okay, so let me touch off on that. The reason why this is important, certainly in the context of the focus of today's discussion, which is unequal access and care for all, basically, it's basically in order for the profession to be able to, and the helping profession, broadly I'm talking, to be able to adequately respond to people's needs, it means then that we have to have a professional understanding of who could provide what. So for example, a psychiatrist is a medical doctor that is trained to understand diseases of the brain, right? And the brain is an organ that has diseases, which then mental illness is one of the ways that it shows itself. So a psychiatrist does that. So a psychiatrist perhaps deals with, not perhaps, a psychiatrist deals with the most clinically ill people, the people with the most complex mental health issues. Then you have psychologists, people who are trained, clinically trained in the ability to address more complicated mental health issues. They're able to use tools to be able to identify some of the presentations that are going on, and they are skilled in therapeutic interventions to be able to help. Talk therapy, all right, so talk therapy. Psychiatrists, of course, are able to give medical therapy, but psychologists are able to use talk therapy to be able to address complex issues and complicated issues. Mental health counselors are counselors who have that almost the same level of training as a psychologist, but without necessarily the training on testing and that kind of stuff. So mental health counselors usually are also able to deal with more complex mental health issues. Then you have school guidance counselors who deal with behavioral presentations of children in school, usually in the context of their normal development. And what I mean by that is children in their normal development are going to have conflict, they're going to have behavioral issues, they're going to have inability to perhaps manage their emotions, which again results in conflict and so forth. So school guidance counselors are able to help students work through some of those things. Then you have social workers who work with family systems to be able to connect them, to wrap them around services that are needed for the family. But social workers work with family systems. Then you have a wide variety of other helping professionals. And I just talked about the fact that there's some people who are just trained in various psychosocial support mechanisms. So the point that I'm making is it must be important to professionalize what is done so that there could be a clear understanding of who provides what, and so that it is done effectively and it is done ethically, right? And so one of the things, as I said, we just want to make sure that we have that discussion as we go along with sensitization and so forth. Everybody, you have pastoral counselors who provide a very necessary service, but they're not clinically trained. So, when we were talking earlier, we talked about the fact that people are spiritual beings and so forth. So they take care of the spiritual beings, right?
Yes.
So, the more we all understand our lane, for want of a better way of putting it, the more we're able to provide that access for all, basically.
Okay. Good. Now, we are basically out of time, but before we leave, I want to know what is the way forward for mental health in the Federation. What is the way forward? For the St. Kitts Mental Health Association, what is the way forward? Jamila.
To continue to build awareness, to sensitize persons, to provide as much support through workshops, counseling sessions, I listed a few of them earlier, mentoring programs, And just being able to advocate for persons and educate persons on what mental health looks like, so they're better able to assist others. We want to mobilize persons who would experience difficulties with mental health, that they are more able now to go out and assist other persons. So that's where Ms. Blake would have mentioned training individuals that they can also give that support to their neighbor or friend. So that's the way forward in terms of the St. Kitts Mental Health Association.
Mrs. Blake?
The way forward, adding to what Jamila just said, includes identifying emerging trends, emerging needs in our federation so that we could be adequately prepared to be able to address those so that there is equal access. So just identifying and preparing for. And the way forward includes broadening the scope of service of mental health and psychosocial support. So moving it out of just only being in a clinical setting, moving it to communities, moving psychosocial support to communities, moving psychosocial support to schools. So broadening the reach so that early access and, eventually early intervention could happen.
Okay, now where could a person access help? We spent a lot of time talking about people not being accessed to help. How can they access help and where can they access help?
Okay, so help could come in the form of information, of links, of all kinds of things. So I'm just going to name a few. The Mental Health Association has a page that we try to keep populated with as much current information as possible about resources. The National Counseling Center, we always, are willing to have people call and ask about help. Because when people call the National Counseling Center, we also, apart from talking to them about what we do, we're also able to guide them in the direction of people who do private practice, and they're people who want private practitioners. And so access help through the National Counseling Center to see services there and to seek services outside. And the Sir Arthur Lake Day Treatment Center, access help through the schools, guidance counselors, through churches, through clinics. Community nurses, especially community mental health nurses, are a great resource. All helping professionals. We have a great program within our within our unit called the Family Counselors Unit. And those family counselors are excellent in connecting. They know what the families are going through, and so they know how to connect services. The Ministry of Social Development and Gender Affairs have several departments within that help people. So you have gender affairs, you have PCPS, all of these are helpers. Any sort of spiritual and church leader and professional. So the point that I'm making is, if you look at mental health and psychosocial support as an all-of-us approach, it means then that you have a variety of places where initial help could be accessed, and then it moves up through the chain, if needed.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank both of you. Jamila, thank you for representing the St. Kitts Mental Health Association. Thank you for coming and sharing with us today on a topic that is so important and that is not always discussed, that of mental health. And of course, you are no novice here. You're a veteran of this program.
Yes.
Mrs. Michelle Delacouge Blake, thank you very much for coming and sharing with us,
You're so
especially
welcome.
during this time, Mental Health Week and Mental Health Day. Mental health is something that we should all be involved in.
Right.
And we have to take care of our mental health. It is not only people with a mental illness
Correct.
who have to take care of their mental health. We all have to take care of our mental health, because without mental health, there really is no health.
Right.
And I want to end with that. I want to thank all of our callers to today's program. Thank you very much. And our listeners that continue to listen from week to week. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for your attention as we continue to bring you updates, information on what is happening within the St. Kitts and Nevis, and in particular within the public sector. Take good care. Next week we will be back. I am Les Roy Williams.